It's always a pleasure to talk about classics in beards and cars. I love the chance to do so whenever I can, and this one's notable for a couple of reasons. It's the first Japanese classic I've ever talked about on the channel, and what more iconic place to start than with a Toyota Celica, but this one's notable for another reason. It's my first Japanese classic, because this is indeed my latest car. For a change, it's not a car that's replacing something else. I actually bought it for specifically the opposite reason. I wanted something new, but I didn't want to replace any of my other cars. I've got the Rolls-Royce, the High Roller, which is my Silver Shadow 4x4 that I'm building. That's not finished and I can't use it yet. I've got my pride and joy, the Lincoln, which I love, but 7 to the gallon isn't exactly daily driver material. And then I've got my absolutely superb daily driver, the cheapest car I've ever bought and the most reliable car I've ever owned, the Daihatsu Syrian Rally, which is brilliant. Gran Turismo 2 nostalgia abounds, especially with the enormous mud flaps I've got on it and the fantastic sounding exhaust, which you can hear in the shorts here on the channel. That one doesn't quite have the charm, it's super incognito, it looks like a retirement home with a steering wheel. So I wanted something that had the charm, the personality of a classic, but which had decent enough fuel economy and crucially wasn't too expensive and was still reliable, so that I could kind of use it as a semi-daily driver. So I started looking around eBay, the usual places, and a vehicle popped up which I hadn't even considered. In fact, it's a vehicle which I hadn't even seen before, this generation of Celica. I know it's probably wild to say that you've never even seen this car before, but somehow I completely missed this car. And I guess not being a Celica aficionado or even a fan really, I never talk about them, it's easy to miss because there are only apparently about 3 of these on the road in the UK. But short story long, I spotted a yellow one for sale on eBay. It was a fresh import, left-hand drive, which is fine by me, rust-free from Arizona, looking for about 7 grand. Very nice car, went to look at it, wasn't quite for me, certainly not for that price. And then there was another one, which I spotted for some reason back to back with that one. This other one though had about double the mileage, which was still only about 60,000, which in 46 years really isn't that much, and they were looking for about 4.5 grand for it instead. My girlfriend preferred the black one. She actually adores this car. It's her second favourite after my Lincoln, and although I wasn't fully sold on it, I thought, you know what, let's go and check it out. And I guess it went well, because here we are, and now I've got the car. So for £4,500 for a vehicle which has only covered 60,000 miles, that sounds like a pretty good start. So what is the story here? Why would someone who's not a Celica fan be won over to buying a Celica? Well, let's talk about the history of the car, and we can see. As the aficionados will of course recognise, this is a second generation Celica, which is kind of ironic that it's the only one which I've ever managed to miss somehow. I'm aware of the first one, the mini Mustang looking Celica, and of course everything after that point, especially the newer stuff, your ST165s, 185s, 205s of course, and even the ZZT231s. You see plenty of those in the UK. Maybe not the 165 quite as much, but even then, you see a few of them. Now this car was actually designed in the States rather than in Japan, and I think you can kind of tell. It does have that kind of small muscle car vibe, and it almost feels to me kind of like a California equivalent of what a Ford Capri was here in the UK, or even a Triumph Spitfire if you go a bit further back. Something which isn't necessarily designed to be the quickest car around, it's just designed to be fun, stylish, affordable, and something which you can just use as much as you want, even as a daily, but still be a great looking little 2+2 coupe or sports car, depending on what you want to call it. Now, speaking of what you want to refer to it as, Toyota actually offered 2 different body styles for this vehicle. There was the notchback and the liftback. Now, for those who are unfamiliar with what a notchback is, that refers to the boot. It means that the boot or the trunk is a separate compartment on the rear, and you don't get into the car through that. This one, which is what I've got, is the liftback. There do seem to be more liftbacks around rather than notchbacks. Certainly the ones that were for sale were liftbacks, and that's what we would call a hatch these days. It means it's more practical, you have more boot space, it's easily accessible, and you'll see here in the video when you put the seats down, it's actually got great loading room. Now of course it's a 2+2, rear seats as you'd expect aren't the biggest. They're probably big enough for somebody to get in on a short journey, but nothing longer than that. And for me that's fine, because like I said, it's kind of a middle ground daily, so 2 seats is fine. Now this particular generation, which of course is the A40 or the RA40, they were very popular apparently in Australia. They sold them in multiple markets. There was the Japanese market, the Euro market, American market, and the majority of ones around the world adhered to California emissions regulations. That's where things actually get quite interesting with my car, because I don't think it is a British car necessarily originally, but we're going to come back to that when we talk about the engine. Now this particular A40 generation covered 1977 through to 1981, so a relatively short run, but within that time, one of the most notable things which happened, in fact in the same year that this one is, mine's a 1978, an XT2000 Celica in particular, is that this is the year when they extended this platform and turned it into something called the Celica Supra. and after a few years, they dropped the Celica name, turned it into its own thing, and became a legend. So this was literally in this same year as this car, the birth of the Toyota Supra. Pretty massive for the history of Toyota. In terms of its size, you can't really necessarily tell in the video. It kind of looks like a fairly long car, but in terms of actual proportions, this is an astonishingly small car. I can just about fit in it with the almost reclining seats, but in terms of actual proportions, it's 174 inches long, it's 65 inches wide, and it's 52 inches tall. So this thing really is low. In fact, it looks a good, I don't know, 1.5 feet maybe lower than my Daihatsu. And a Daihatsu isn't exactly a big car to begin with. In fact, at the roof, that means it's less than 4.5 feet tall. So it really is a small vehicle. As you'd expect, being both small and, of course, a classic, so simple, it is light as well. This is around a 2,300 pound car, which is between 1,000 and 1,100 kilos. So in other words, about 1 metric ton. So that's a pretty good start in terms of performance. It is, as you would hope, rear-wheel drive, of course front engine, and the gearboxes were available with 2 primary options around this time, a 5-speed manual or a 3-speed auto. Mine is the auto because, again, I wanted it to have the cruiser factor, and incidentally the 3-speed, which this one had, ran from 78 to 80, and then in 1981 they brought out a 4-speed auto. And one of the interesting pivot points through this car's design was the facelift, and the facelift came right after this one. It went from the 4 round headlights, which are very distinctive on this particular one, to covered, more rectangular shaped lights, which incidentally the other yellow one that I went to look at was of that generation. Now the reasons why this car is notable actually go beyond just being the birth of the Supra and being a cool little car in its own right. It's actually quite notable in terms of switchgear. This seems to have been the car that really popularized the idea of having your washers, wipers and indicators all on those 2 primary stalks next to the steering wheel. And then after that, a lot of other brands, to this day still plenty of brands, started doing the same thing. So quite the pioneer in multiple ways. Some of these cars were also available with, I would say, a very appropriate Targa top conversion. A Targa top which, although not done by Toyota, was endorsed by them. So that was kind of a semi-official, certainly an officially recognized thing, which you can get on some versions. And speaking to the Targa approach, it makes sense because not only does it have that almost 911 Targa style nice silver bar running up either side, which is one of its most distinctive design points, but it's also a pillarless door. And although you can't really tell in the video, there's no frame around the glass, it's just the glass that rolls down into the door. Now, an interesting thing about this generation of the Celica, being as it was, of course, not a beast as the Supra would ultimately become, all of the versions of this car, incidentally there were nearly 50 different variants at one time that Toyota was making of these, they all had a 4-cylinder engine. Straight 4, it's exactly what this one has, being an XT2000 as the name suggests. It's a 2-litre in this form, 2-litre, naturally aspirated, straight 4, it is running a carburettor. Some versions actually had fuel injection, but not this particular one, and in terms of the range, you're looking at between a 1.6 litre and a 2.4. Now, speaking to that engine, that is where things get interesting, in particular when it comes to mine, because this car, as it seems to have been registered as a UK vehicle from new, should have something called an 18RC engine, which was basically California regulations, which, at least unless I'm mistaken, the vast majority of the world had. America, Europe, Britain, and I believe a couple of other places too. Then Japan had their own version, etc, etc. The thing is, mine doesn't have that engine. You'll see in the video at a certain point, it says RU on my engine instead of RC. That is the Japanese emissions control version. So either this car has had a motor swap at some point, which is possible, but it does beg the question, why would you put the Japanese engine in? Surely that would be more difficult to find. I wouldn't have thought it would be worth the extra effort, given that the difference in spec, as we'll touch on in just a second, isn't really monumental. It's more powerful, but not like crazy. And then on the other hand, it could be, and I think this might be more likely, this was a Japanese spec car, because in Japan they drive on the same side of the road as here in the UK, so the steering wheel would also line up, and it would have been relatively simple to swap it from a kilometre speedo to a miles per hour, etc. I think this was built for the Japanese market, sent over to the UK from brand new, maybe more demand for black ones in the UK, you know, whatever the case may be, send it over when new and then immediately register it as a UK car. I think that might be what happened in this case, and I'm sure if I dug around I could find out, but at least I haven't yet. So that's an interesting thing about this one, that it appears to be a UK car, but then it's got the Japanese engine. So what's the actual difference in terms of engine? Well, the C-spec engine has a whopping 97 horsepower, I know, steady your beating heart. This version, the U engine, has 101. Not a massive difference, but an improvement. Having over 100 horses is cool to be able to say. Then in terms of torque, that's actually a more notable change, because the UK spec, if you will, that C spec, would have had 107 foot-pounds. This one, the Japanese spec, is 112. So that is actually a pretty decent difference for a smaller car. In terms of production years, there is a difference there as well. See, the C spec engine, again the less powered, was built from 71 all the way through to 81, so it had a much longer run. Whereas the one which mine has, the Japanese spec engine, it was from 1975 only to 1978, which would have meant that this one that I've got is one of the very last with that engine, if it was indeed a 78 engine. So an interesting discrepancy in terms of what the car should have versus what it actually has. But whatever the story is behind it, the fact remains that is the motor that it's got, and I think it's pretty cool. In terms of actually driving it, what's it like? What's the performance like? What's the fuel economy like? What's it like to drive? Well, the first thing was quite the learning curve, and that was that it doesn't even have power steering, which of course brings the weight down and makes things more direct and more simple. But I hadn't owned a non-power steering classic before, thank goodness for that, with like 20-foot long Lincolns. But this one definitely was a bit of a learning curve there. On the motorway, it's a lot twitchier. It tends to follow every bump in the road. You do have to focus a bit more while driving. I've already got a lot more used to that though, as I think you can tell in the video. One hand on the wheel, one hand out the window, and you can just get a feel for it. You kind of let the car go to some degree where it wants to go, and don't necessarily overcorrect it. To me, that was the biggest takeaway that I found from this one. You don't really need to correct it as much as you think you do. The second thing is that the brakes are actually pretty damn good for a classic car. They are very hard, but they do the job, and with such a low weight in a car that's not necessarily going that quick most of the time anyway, they do more than an adequate job. In terms of performance, well, it seems difficult to find an official 0 to 60 time or top speed, at least theoretically up around 120 miles an hour. There's no chance in hell I would ever take this car to that kind of speed. I'd be lucky to ever even hit 70 in this thing, let alone 120. But in terms of acceleration, it's hard to say. Back then, of course, the auto would have been slower. It's not like these days where efficiency is improved. So I would guess probably, it's not as slow as you'd think. It does feel like it picks up pretty well actually. I would guess probably somewhere between maybe 10 and 13 seconds. It could be slower, but it feels like maybe that kind of region. And like I said, it does pick up pretty well when you put your foot down. You don't even need to go foot to the floor. You can easily keep up with traffic, easily overtake stuff. It's nippy, as we would call it here in the UK. It's not fast, but it's quicker than you'd expect. And obviously being more so a good-looking cruiser, well, that's exactly what it needs to be. One of the interesting things, of course, is going to be fuel economy, because you do have to measure your expectations. These days, a 1,000 kilo car with a little 100 horsepower engine, you'd be getting like 45, 50 to the gallon easy. But again, you've got to remember, 46-year-old car, 3-speed automatic from the 1970s, 2-litre engine, which was pretty big for back then, and crucially, carburettor. So of course, it's not blessed with the significant power advantage and efficiency advantage of the Japan-only EFI models. But from my experience driving this one back, it's got a 60-litre fuel tank. I drove it a 180-mile trip home the same day that I viewed it, and I got 27 to the gallon average. So for a classic, not too bad. Of course, by today's standards, that sounds horrendous, but again, compared to what I'm used to, in the case of my Lincolns, 7 to the gallon over here, 12 to the gallon over there, and even my much newer Escalade that I had, even with cylinder shut-off technology, was still doing like 15 to the gallon. So in comparison, it's not bad at all. Half a tank to go 180 miles, I don't think that's bad, especially when the tank itself isn't overly expensive to fill. In terms of cornering, handling, how it feels to drive, well, like I said, the learning curve mostly was with the power steering, or lack thereof. It is a bit of a firmer ride, of course, than American stuff, but not uncomfortable. You only really notice the harshest of bumps, and it's a really fun little thing to drive. Having that long sweeping bonnet out in front of you actually isn't as notable as you'd think. The car is so low down, and the bonnet kind of gradually sweeps down, so you don't really see the bonnet in your vision as much as you'd think, and it doesn't feel oddly proportioned. It feels very nicely weighted through corners. Of course, you're not going to throw it around like a modern car, and let's say it as it is, my Daihatsu would absolutely annihilate this thing in a race. It wouldn't even be close, but it's not a fair comparison. Different time periods, different purposes. The car is a cruiser. It's something which fulfills the exact purpose of what I wanted, a middle ground, like I said earlier on. It's a lot of fun to drive, and I think honestly the only downside to this car, well, there are two. The one downside is finding parts, which of course is the case for a lot of vehicles. I was blessed in terms of the person selling it having a box full of spares, some of which would be very hard to find, like side repeater lenses and even a full rear light. That kind of stuff is, a godsend for a classic. You can find them online, but mostly it's going to be the shipping costs that will really sting you in the wallet. Aside from that though, I think the one biggest shame about this is their rarity. There are so few of these left in the UK because of that thin Japanese metal which just rusts so quickly on our salted roads. This car, for example, has been welded in the past. That doesn't bother me too much, you know, it's not like I'm buying it to keep its value anyway. You can see it's covered in dents and dings, which again I actually like. It's got seat covers because the seats are ripped. You can see the rear seats are ripped as well. It's far from being a perfect vehicle. The yellow one was £7,000 and that wasn't perfect either. So clearly the market is still being kind to these. Even so, I like having a car that I can use without worrying about something, you know, chipping the paint or scratching this, that or the other. Something that's genuinely usable. And that to me is the shame. I think this would be a perfect beginner's classic for a younger person in particular because it, across the board, is such a usable car. You've technically got 4 seats. The boot space is fantastic, great handling, it gives you the learning curve of the carburetor, no power steering, working on a car yourself if at all possible. It's all that great learning experience, but it's something that's different to the more obvious Morris Minors, Minis, Beetles, something that's got a bit more flash to it. It looks a bit more gentlemanly or a bit more sports car-ish than something like a Mini, etc. And even the fuel economy, that's more than good enough to use it as a daily if you wanted to. I mean, even a Mini back then would get like, what, 35 to the gallon at best, so it's not that much of a difference, given that this is a significantly quicker 2-litre engine car, which is still great through corners. And the real cherry on the cake to prove my point about it being a perfect first classic, this is the cheapest car I have ever insured. This was £124 for the year's insurance. Admittedly a classic 5,000 mile policy, but still, that is so ridiculously cheap, and combined with having like 4 times the fuel economy on the motorway of something like the Lincoln, that's a pretty damn good combination for somebody who does want that kind of American style, but something that's way more reliable, way better through corners, far, you know, more focused, stiffer, better suspension, ironically almost very British in its approach, something more about the cornering, more about the fun. And that is another reason why I find it wild that these cars weren't more popular over here. To me, this looks like the kind of car which we would have loved here in the UK. It's not overly expensive, it's reliable, fuel's decent, the performance is more than good enough, and it's great through corners. The rust got to a lot of them from what I hear, and that really is a shame. I'm sure a lot of them were exported as well to other countries that make more use of them. But yeah, if you get the chance to drive one of these, maybe even own one, I would say try it out. And of course, we're far too in the early days to talk about long-term living costs. Even then, I would find it hard to believe that this would be more expensive than something like a classic exotic or a classic muscle car or something like that. That is it for this particular spotlight on my 1978 Toyota Celica XT2000 Liftback. And of course, I'd love to hear your thoughts down below. Maybe did you used to have one of these? Do you still have one of these perhaps? Some stories, good or bad, either way. Ultimately though, that's it for this installment. I'll see you next time with more, and thanks for watching.